Hello, my name is Elise, and this video will be an introduction biology video about cells. This will be the first of 3 videos, and I do recommend watching them in the established order. The next video will be on DNA, and the final video will be on evolution. And like I said, the order is for a reason. The way these concepts interconnect with one another builds off of the videos. So I do recommend that you watch them in this order. So let's get started. So, what are cells? Now, cells are the basic building blocks of all living things, and the human body is composed of trillions of them. They, of course, perform a lot of functions. The main ones being providing bodily structure, taking in nutrients from food, converting said nutrients into energy, and also carrying out their own specialized functions. And these make up the entire human body. So, cells, when they find other cells that perform similar specialized functions, they create tissues. Tissues that perform similar specialized functions form organs. Organs that perform similar specialized functions form organ systems, and organ systems together form what's called organisms. Now, although in this list, the cells at the bottom as the most simple, each cell is composed of many parts that's like their own organs that have their own special functions. We'll be getting into those later. So before we get into that, let's talk about the types of cells. So there are 2 main types of cells. There are prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are bacteria and archaea. Now, if you'll notice the word archaea derived from archaic, this is fitting for the prokaryote because these were the first forms of life on Earth. They're much simpler and smaller than eukaryotes, as you can see in this diagram, and they also lack a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. Their DNA consists of a single circular chromosome, and they also are in direct contact with the cytoplasm, as you can see here. There is nothing protecting the DNA. So there are 3 regions in the prokaryote. There is the cell envelope, there is the cytoplasmic region, which is right here, and then there is the flagella and pili. This is what helps the cell move and have contact with other cells. Next up, there are eukaryotes. These are what form plants, animals, fungi, slime mold, protozoa, and algae. They're about 15 times wider than your typical prokaryote, and their main distinguishing feature is their compartmentalization. Just by looking at this diagram, you can notice that they are much more complex, and they also have more storage essentially in them. They organize well because of their development of evolution. And this has created their cell-bound organelles, which includes the nucleus, as you can see right here, which separates the nucleolus and the DNA from the cytoplasm. Now, the DNA consists of 1 or more linear chromosomes, which is another huge distinguishing feature of it from the prokaryote. And the name itself, eukaryote, means true kernel, which refers to the nucleus. So let's get started on the organelles. So the main organelle that you'll want to know is the cell nucleus. This is what houses the chromosomes, and it's also where almost all DNA replication and RNA synthesis occurs, with the occasional exception of it occurring in the mitochondria. Now, if you're wondering what the difference between DNA and RNA is, I'll be going into more detail on that in the next video, but essentially, when you imagine your typical double helix of DNA, if you were to split that into 2 individual helixes, those individually would be RNA. So, mitochondria and chloroplasts are what generate energy for the cell. They're often called the powerhouse of the cell because of this function. Mitochondria are self-replicating, and they're found in all eukaryotic cells, while chloroplasts are only in plants and algae. This is because they go through a process called photosynthesis in order to capture the sun's energy to make carbohydrates. Next up, there's the endoplasmic reticulum. This is like the mailman of the cell, essentially. It's a targeted molecular transport system, and it has 2 forms. The rough ER, which is named after its ribosomes that are present on the surface, and those are used to secrete protein into the ER. And then there's the smooth ER that lacks ribosomes but plays more of a role in calcium sequestration and release. Next up is the Golgi apparatus. If the endoplasmic reticulum were the mailman, the Golgi apparatus would be similar to the post office. This is what packages the macromolecules, such as proteins and lipids, that are synthesized by the cell. And it also has a lot of ties in working with the endoplasmic reticulum. Then we have lysosomes and peroxisomes. These contain digestive enzymes, which digest excess or worn out organelles, food particles, as well as engulf viruses or bacteria. And the main significance of having the peroxisomes is that they contain enzymes which rid the cell of toxic peroxides. And the cell would not be able to house these destructive enzymes if they were not contained in a membrane-bound system, which is why they're so important. Next up is centrosomes. This is essentially the cytoskeleton organizer. It produces the cell's microtubules as well as directs transport through the ER and Golgi apparatus. Then we have vacuoles. These are what sequester waste products and store water in plants. They're essentially like waste removal in the cells. Then we have ribosomes. These are found in both eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. And they're large complexes of RNA and protein molecules. And they act as somewhat of an assembly line for the synthesis of protein from RNA amino acids. Then there's the cell membrane. This provides protection for the cell, as well as transports nutrients into the cell and toxic substances out of the cell. Then we have the cell wall. This is like an addition of the cell membrane. It mechanically and chemically protects the cell from its environment. And something to take note is that it also restricts movement, which is why for example, cell walls are present in plant cells because plants do not move, whereas they are not present in human cells because humans do need to move. Then there is cytoplasm. This holds the components of the cell and provides protection as well as creates the cell shape. As shown in the diagram from earlier, it is also in prokaryotes. Then there's the capsule. This is only in prokaryotes, and this is a gelatinous outer layer present in only some bacteria, and it's outside of the cell wall. Then there's the flagella. These organelles are for cellular motility, and they stretch from the cytoplasm through the cell membrane to outside the cell wall. There are different types for prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And then there are the ephemeræ, and these are also called the pileus with the plural pili. These are short, thin, hair-like filaments found on the surface of bacteria. They're formed by a protein called pilin. These are responsible for the attachment of bacteria to specific receptors on human cells by cell adhesion, which is how we get a lot of bacterial infections. So we've learned about the parts of the cell. Now let's learn about what they do. So in cell, one of the main cellular functions is replication. This involves a single cell, usually referred to as the mother cell, dividing into two daughter cells. And this leads to growth in multicellular organisms and procreation in unicellular organisms. In prokaryotes usually divide by binary fission, whereas eukaryotes usually undergo a more complex process, which is known as nuclear division or mitosis. And this is followed by the division of the cell, which is called cytokinesis. And diploid cells may also go under meiosis to produce haploid cells, usually 4 of them. If you're wondering what these cells are, these are the sex cells in the human body. Then there's DNA repair. This is extremely important for the cell because this is the process carried out by the complex enzyme systems to detect and repair damage in the cell DNA. However, due to the DNA being so complex, the DNA repair is very difficult for the cell to perform, which is why it's so important to have the cell wall, the cell membrane, and in prokaryotes, the capsule in order to protect this DNA so that damage does not get to it. And there are a couple types. There is nucleotide excision repair, DNA mismatch repair, non-homologous end joining of the double strand breaks, as well as recombinational repair and light-dependent repair, which is known as photoreactivation. Then there's growth and metabolism. This is how cells divide individual nutrient molecules for other biological functions. I'm sure you're familiar with the phrase growth as well as metabolism. On a cellular level, these are how individual cells work together to form bigger functions. The growth allows for the cells to divide, as mentioned earlier, and the metabolism is what allows each individual cell to take in nutrients. So just like how we eat and sequester waste products, cells do the same thing. Then there's protein synthesis. This involves the formation of new protein molecules from amino acids based on the DNA. And it's extremely important because if you remember from before, this is done by ribosomes. And ribosomes were one of the few membrane-bound organelles that were within the prokaryote as well as the eukaryote. So this is a very important function in the cell. Then there's cellular motility. In unicellular organisms, this is just how the cell moves, and it's used to find food as well as escape from predators. In multicellular organisms, it's used for cellular processes. For example, In the human body, when we have a wound, cells will move to the area of infection and attempt to heal it. So that's my video on cells. Next up will be a video on DNA. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.